I'll tell you what, though, I am writing a lot more and I'm loving it because of this workshop that you got me into. So thank you again. Thank you for getting me into the workshop.
I appreciate the thanks, but really it was a simple email, and we'd been talking about you joining this, and I had such a great time last year, and you and I have talked about it a little bit. I'm just really curious, like for you, what was the impetus to do this workshop?
We had talked about it last year. I remember you raved about it. And then I saw you publish a couple of pieces coming out of the workshop, if I recall correctly. So that proved to me that it could be effective. Also, the connections that you made in the workshop, you met some really cool people. And I thought, hey, that sounds fun, meeting cool people and having a reason to write. But I got to be honest, all of that pales in comparison to just the re-energizing of my creative impetus. Right before the workshop, I was feeling really down in the dumps, I think is the best way to put it, and just sort of questioning everything and blah, blah, blah. And now that I guess we're 11 days in to the 24-day workshop, and I feel like looking back on me just 2, 3 weeks ago as how ridiculously stupid you were, child of 11 days ago, that you hadn't internalized all this wonderful, feedback that you've been giving people for 5 years on the podcast. Like, just follow your own advice, dummy. It's going to be great. So that's what the workshop has done for me. The implied social pressure of, hey, all these random strangers who also want to write are going to be reading your stuff. You can't just like slog something together and chuck it out the door and feel good about yourself. So you need to actually put the time in, like do something real. And that kind of fear of being judged really just melts away because you don't have time for it. You need to get something done. And so when I'm working on my stuff, I run into that thing that Eric was talking about in our previous interview, which is, yeah, you're going to have some writer's block, but if you just kind of push through it, because a writer had given him some advice that the first 45 minutes is sort of you just working out, all the other distractions of the day and getting into the piece. And I find actually it's fewer than 45 minutes probably because the, the thing I'm writing is so short, but it usually only takes about 15 minutes to kind of expunge the day. And then now I can find something to write about. And what's so exciting, Tim, is that I have no idea what I'm going to write about when I start. And I always thought, oh man, I got to have a plan, or at least I have to have a concept, and maybe it's something I've kind of worked out a little bit. Like, no, I can just show up and start writing and something interesting will come out of it. So yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm like super pumped.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, this is my second year with the SmokeLong workshop. And so I've really been interested in kind of catching myself in the way that I'm approaching this one as I did last year. Last year, I felt like, it was so new and it was meeting all of these people, like you said, made some great connections and having, yes, that implied social pressure of just getting something up there. And also to a degree, wanting to impress folks. I mean, I think that's part of it. Like I wanted to show that I had an acumen. Of course, we all want to make sure that we're doing something. And this year, I'm feeling a little bit less of that pressure to try and show folks what I can do, which ain't much. But I think I'm more comfortable in saying, you know what? I feel good about this piece. I do have some other stuff that I have to do today. This is a prompt a day for 24 days out of the month. So I feel a little better about being able to post something with the idea, you know what, I'm going to be able to take this out in a couple weeks once this kind of settles down, once I'm out of the March, micro marathon, and just, focus on them and make them as best as I want, or to make them like, in our interview with Eric Scott Tryon, like make sure that they're 100% what I want to say. Because I was catching myself, I was also early on in the very, very first week of this, I was doing a lot of writing last year in the 5:30 to 7 a.m. hour, like early morning, waking up, getting the coffee, not looking at any social media, just looking at what the prompt was and letting that like boom, spark something. And now I'm not putting my pressure on myself that much. Well, I have to be honest with you. There were a couple of days where I was like, oh, I don't have anything to write for this. I don't have anything to write for this. And I think actually one of the prompts I didn't post on the day that the prompt was initiated. I sort of like waited until the next day because I was like, wait a minute, I've got a good idea. Let me hit this up tomorrow. So it's been a little bit more relaxing for me. My personal goal for this is to just have a bunch of pieces that I can say, wow, okay, this has got some legs. And of course, there are going to be some stinkers. I already know which ones are my pieces that I put up there that I'm like, let's not return to that one. But it's been really, really good. It's been very, very good. So I'm so happy that you are feeling so excited. And I also love the fact that with this workshop, every 8 days, they mix up the groups so that you can meet as many people, you can read as many works as you can from different writers. And you and I are not in the same group anymore that we were in the first octet, as they call it. But you're still like writing me every night, like, look what I wrote today. And
I know. I'm like a, that's the
so
kid,
great.
the kid with the macaroni glitter project. That's me. Look what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's just so, different from the way that I've done it before. And it's funny because we give advice on the show. We'll put it in quotes, but we do try to help people with best practices. And so all the different authors who've come on the show and all the different reading that we've done suggest, that having a focused writing time and doing it pretty much every day and punching through the inertia of writer's block, this, that, the other. So you can hear all of that and intellectually agree with it, stroke your chin and nod thoughtfully and say, yes, yes. But then until you actually do it and experience the joy of doing it, that's when it really starts to cook in. And so the mistake that I was making really just 3 weeks ago and beyond was that I was still in a bad habit trying to wait for either inspiration or wait until I had the right kind of sensibility to sit down and go, oh, I have something I can work on. Let's work on it now. And if it didn't immediately, open the tap and start flowing with wonderful language, I'll go, oh, well, I guess I didn't have anything after all. I'll try again another time. So like this terrible, terrible process that I used to have in my 20s. So this workshop cures me of that, because the demands are immediate and I want to do something decent. And what's so weird about it, Tim, is I just have no idea what I'm going to write. Like day to day. And so the prompts are really interesting. And I think even after this workshop is over, I would probably continue, not every day, but I would definitely continue doing a prompt maybe once or twice a week, just to kind of keep that muscle strong. But I do like the constraint too. So the first week we were doing 250 word stories. The second week we're now doing 100 word stories. And I think next week it's 400 or whatever. But, having a word count is a really interesting constraint. And it definitely 100 words makes you consider every word needs to count. And so the way that you approach those is different from, say, something that's more open-ended. So I like that. But those aren't the only constraints. We can find other things to do. And we've talked about using AI and using other online tools to provide constraint, to provide prompts. That might be an opportunity once this workshop is over and I'm looking for, I kind of want to work within a framework. Let me go get a random framework and I'll work within it and see if anything cool comes out. And like you said, if it doesn't, you move on.
Yeah. For me, one of the other things that I enjoy about the prompts that we're getting, and this is why sometimes when I go online to look for prompts to try and shake something out of the proverbial tree, it's just a prompt. It's like, snowfall. Okay. What I enjoy about the SmokeLong workshop, and I think what I need to do more of outside of it, is again the most basic of all pieces of advice. You've got to read more. And each prompt in this workshop comes with 3 or 4 examples that sort of drive the point home of the prompt that they've given you, the constraint that they've given you. Here's how a couple other authors have written stories like the thing we're talking about today. And I love that. And I think that that is the most important thing about this workshop is, yes, you are getting work out there, but also reading other people's stuff is such a great way to help you analyze your own work. Giving that feedback, having other people give feedback on yours. Because not only was I very excited about the stuff that the material that I wrote, but it's also very helpful to get a better language in giving other people feedback. And that's what I really, really enjoy about it. And you have to read more to engage with all of these other people. You don't want to be somebody that puts work up on SmokeLong or any workshop and then doesn't contribute back. You know what I mean? Hey, here's my piece, everybody. Take a look at it. Take a look at it. Tell me what you think. And then not help them in trying to succeed or trying to reach their own goals with their own pieces.
Yeah.
So I just really, really, really love that. And it's something that I'm happy to have, and it's just helping me read more because, I just love when I read a piece and go, oh, that's how I could have done that, It's very, very helpful. Very, very helpful.
Yeah, there's a few things we could probably talk about, like the etiquette at the workshop, like how do you provide feedback in a way that is useful or relevant? And I think some of that is political, so I kind of don't want to step into that as much. But I know that you and I were talking sort of outside of the recording space about the quality of the feedback and how to take it and how to give it. So that might actually be something that we could venture into right now. I know we've done at least two different episodes about giving and receiving feedback. So we have a methodology, but you've been rethinking that, and applying it. And I'm really curious to see, what kind of feedback you're getting, what kind of feedback you're giving, and how that works. So,
I might have said this in one of the other two times we've talked about giving feedback, but I just remember when I used to work at a coffee shop, I used to be the GM of a coffee shop in Manhattan. And I am a huge coffee drinker, but I am not a coffee aficionado. So in other words, if you give me black coffee, first off, I'm going to be like, ew, gross. Where's all the sugar? There are folks that really enjoy coffee that are like, oh, I can taste this, that, and the third, almost like a sommelier with wine. And when I approached the bosses at my coffee shop, their coffee shop, and said, I don't feel comfortable being able to tell people what they taste like. They were like, it's up to you. It's your personal experience with the coffee. There's no right answer. If you are a huge metalhead and you want to describe the taste of the coffee via various bands, like, well, this band's a little more Sepultura and this band's a little, whatever works for you is what you need to do. So when it comes to my own feedback, I find that I'm not someone that spends a lot of time giving feedback, and that could be out of a little bit of an insecurity that I'm getting it wrong, because you also don't want to read somebody's piece and be like, I really don't understand how this is about Mars and space and the space race. And they're like, I wrote a piece about my cat. What are you talking about? I try to encourage folks with what they've done, because you never know where they're coming from and you never know what's going on in their lives. And this is a huge risk for people to put their work out there for 10, 12, 15, for zillions of people to read, especially because, when you get something published in a literary magazine, there's a little bit of a validation. Okay, this was good enough that the people who run this lit mag think that this piece it should be read by folks. That's great. Wonderful. But when you're writing sloppy, messy first drafts that you just whipped out in 15 minutes before you had to go to work or before you had to shovel the driveway, they are works in progress, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage. So giving them a little bit of like, hey man, this is great. This is a wonderful first draft. This is going really good. I like to do a little bit of that. And then I kind of try and get better at, this is one of the things that I'm changing, is trying to listen more as to what the person is asking. So whenever folks in this workshop put up a piece, they might say, hey, I'm having trouble with a title, or I don't know if the ending lands, or I'm looking for help in this section. That's the kind of stuff that I really try to pay attention to more in order to try and give my, little 2 cents as to what they might make better. Yeah. So listening for what the person is looking for, that is to me paramount. Instead of coming in there, throwing elbows, being like, your piece needs this when they didn't ask it, Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
No, no, definitely. There's actually a few things that I jotted down that I wanted us to go through. Of course, I have my top three list. You got to have your top three list, Art. Come on, man. So I've got three different things I want you to consider, but we'll get to those in a minute because really when you start thinking about feedback, the first thing that I would ask is who's it for? And that's a real question because at times, certainly as a younger, less experienced person who is more filled with their own self-importance, their own ego, my feedback was to demonstrate how knowledgeable I was and how amazing I was. And I think that's why people did not respond well to it frequently enough that I noticed. And, good on them because it's not really what I do now. 30 years later, the feedback is really for the receiver rather than the giver. And so what about you, Tim? I mean, when you're giving feedback, are you primarily trying to accomplish something in particular? Are you trying to demonstrate something about yourself? Like, who's the feedback for?
I think for a long time when I was younger, and this was in any relationship, whether it was with friends or with partners or whatever, I was so insecure that I thought I needed to show them that I was a smart person, that I knew what I was doing, much like you were just kind of talking about.
Same.
And I think there's a great example. I love this example, watching The Bear and having folks behind the restaurant sort of, sometimes they're behind the restaurant and they'll talk through their problems. And I think one of the episodes, it was Carmi who actually heard someone's problems and just went, heard. Because for a long time, if someone's going through a struggle, you want to swoop in with the answer for them. You want to be helpful. But I think I also, in my earlier relationships, wanted to be helpful, but wanted it to be helpful for a self-serving way. Like, I am a cool guy. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I've really tried to step back on, is going in and saying, what would make this piece better? Now, of course, we could open up the books right now, even in today's, SmokeLong prompt or yesterday's or a couple of days ago, and see if I've actually, walked that walk. I might find something and be like, oh, wait a minute. I did tell them what to do here. But I'm trying to be better at just reading someone's piece, and then giving my honest feedback about what I felt about it. And if they're asking a question, I might try to address it. And you also don't need to have all the answers for questions that you weren't asked.
Yeah. Good point. As we get into this sort of analyzing your own feedback and really thinking about what it's useful for, that first question of who is the feedback for, it really ought to be for the receiver. And, we are just providing context for the writer because it is virtually impossible for them to experience the story as a reader because they originated it. And the only way that they could really do that would be to spend weeks or months away from it and then come to it fresh, having forgotten it. Then they can experience it as a reader. So that feedback, especially early feedback, gives them kind of a fast lane, a shortcut to get to that knowledge. And when you have a cross-section of people, when you start to see patterns emerge, which I have seen in my the feedback to my pieces, very frequently people are saying different things, but they're talking about the same part of the story. And I really discount what they're saying just because I don't want to lift and land someone else's idea and say, okay, well, I originated that, because that's not true. And that's one of the risks of being very prescriptive in your advice. Like, well, you should change this word to this, and you should spin this other character off in this other direction. And now we're writing the story together, and that's icky, right? But instead, just sort of pointing out, hey, the ending didn't land for me. Maybe something with a little more of a gut punch. Hey, this character seems flat, or hey, this character seems really well-rounded. The language is very strong here. Notice that the feedback can be either positive reinforcement or constructive feedback, right? Those are the things that we can provide. But regardless, it's for that writer. So the next thing that I like to look at when I'm providing feedback is this reflexive? And so if you go back and listen to the refill from a few weeks ago, the one called Conflict First, I did this, this is modeling this behavior. I was giving people all of this feedback that was kind of the same, which was, wow, the writing's really interesting, but it'd be great if the story had more conflict. And then I said, well, shoot, if I'm telling people that, am I maybe kind of telling myself that too? Let me go back and look at what I wrote and see if I would give myself the same feedback. And I would have. And I was pissed at myself, because I'm like sitting here, Sermon on the Mount style, telling people what's wrong with their stories. And I have done the same thing, So that's the next step is looking at your feedback. Not only am I trying to help this person, but am I actually talking about my own work, and how can I look at my work through the lens of what I'm, the feedback that I'm providing to other people.
I think there's also this idea where, and maybe it's just me, where you're so nervous and you're so insecure about what you're sharing that folks coming to you with criticism might be, you might take it the wrong way. And that's one of the other things that I had to really, really get out of last year, was that people aren't coming for you. They're just trying to help. I sometimes have, I think last year when I was first in this workshop, I did take folks the wrong way sometimes. Be like, oh man, come on, you can't say that to me. Don't you understand? Oh, wait. Oh, hold on a second. And once I removed my ego from it, I was like, oh, yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I think that, yes, when you were talking about being younger and wanting to try to be the smartest guy in the room, which, frustratingly you are all the time, Art. Why don't you just pull out another metaphor real quick? What is it like when someone's the smartest guy in the room all the time?
It's like being the captain of every ship.
You know what? I got to be honest with you. If Emily Rinkema was right here with us, she would say captain of every ship. That's I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, that's right. That's her new story prompt.
She'd have something published in Granta or something like that.
Yeah. Well, good for her. We, friend of the show. We love her dearly. So
yeah.
No, but for real, what you were getting at is exactly what I was hoping we would talk about with the third piece, which is what are the results? Like, what are you trying to accomplish with the feedback? And I've always thought, okay, like, let's go back 30 years. I have a much larger ego. I have much less deserved reason to be this demonstrative. But like, okay, let's say that I express to someone exactly what's wrong with their story and I give them the exact methodology to fix it. Does that make me a better writer? No. Does that help me in any way? It might help them to craft a story in my sensibility, but like, does that help them be a better writer? Probably not, honestly. I mean, it seems like writers have to sort of discover these things on their own and rediscover as we're learning, until it finally cooks in. So like, what is the point of feedback from the point of view of the giver of the feedback? I think coming at it the way that you approach it, Tim, which is with an attitude of being helpful, trying to just, give that author a little bit of something to think about so that when they go back to it, they can make it a little better, just kind of nudging continuous improvement. And also, helping them to see maybe where things could be different the next time they try it to make it a little better, instead of pointing out flaws or providing direct suggestions or rewriting whole sections of their story or whatever. Like, I've seen all of these things happen. I've seen that in workshops where people come in redlining a text and hand it back to the author. Here, I fixed your story. And I'm like, oh my God, it's horrible.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Do you remember, I don't know if you remember this, but way back, I think it was the creative writing the creative writing class that you and I took together where we first met in like 93 or 94 at the University of New Orleans. There was a piece that I wrote and someone in the class hated it so much. She stood up from her desk and went to the chalkboard and started listing things out about the story.
Oh my God.
I was just like, oh no, like what did I do?
Yeah. Now it wasn't your story. It was somebody else's story.
Oh, it was mine.
No,
it was mine.
Was it really?
Am I Mandela affecting something here?
I don't remember it being yours.
It was mine.
Wow. Okay. No, I didn't put two and two together on that. Sorry. No, I do remember that woman walking to the chalkboard and starting to list things off. which is,
Yeah.
that's a move. That's a choice.
It's a move. It's a move. But again, we're in college. That's what you do. You're sort of like you're trying things out. You know, I mean, sure, I set fire to her car later that day, but that was younger me.
Right.
Younger me. I'll tell you what is a past participle.
That's right. You know what's in
By the way,
past tense? Your car's in past tense.
I have no idea what a past participle is. That's probably why
that's okay.
I need that. Yeah.
No, but well, I mean, look, so obviously if we took feedback as that approach, listing things that are wrong with the story, how does that make your writing better? How does that improve the story that you're commenting on? How does that even encourage a writer to take you seriously? Like, that's one of the downsides of negative reinforcement, just saying what's wrong without providing any context or possible way through, is that the receiver will just say, oh, well, clearly this isn't for them, and so I'll just discount everything they say. So like the feedback that's being provided should be there to help. So I think it's worthwhile for us to look at 3 different kind of dualities and see how we would approach those differently. So the first thing is writing versus story. And what I mean by that is you can critique the writing, which is the quality of the prose, and you can critique the story, which is the characters and what they do. And I think there is a duality there, that if one is working and the other is not, that's perfectly valid for you to sort of point out where one is working and the other is not.
For me, it's listening to the red flag in my head that sort of says, oh, I've hit a little bit of a speed bump in this piece. And I cannot say this enough. With this specific workshop that we're talking about, they are first drafts. Now, of course, first draft means maybe they kind of worked on it maybe once or twice. Maybe that's kind of what I'm thinking, because you got a big giant glob of an idea and you want to kind of whittle it down so that it's at least presentable. So for a lot of these folks, it's a very first draft, and I think that those are the kind of things for me that are easy to kind of like to get that feeling that something's a little bit off. And those are the things that I try to say, like, just there are very basic things that you can kind of talk about. Like, oh, I was a little confused about who was speaking in this area, things like that. So when it gets into the deeper question of like story, yeah, I think there's an overview that you can take. I think it just sort of, it's whatever hits you as a person. Like I said, when I was, trying to discuss what I thought the coffee tasted like or how I liked it, there's certain things that I react to that you might not react to. And I think that that's why you and I have had the relationship we've had for so long. I know that you're going to come to me and say, Tim, this story is, what are you doing? And I can go to you and say, this sentence sounds a little weird. Can you speak it out loud? So, I mean, it's person to person, which is a great way to get out of answering that question.
No, it's a perfect way to dodge that. It's absolutely stunning. The soft shoe. But, it is unfair of me to pose that to you with literally no prep. So thank you for being a good sport.
No, but I mean, but it's a very valid question, because with these micro pieces, there's still, a lot of times it's like, like, for example, you're doing a list story or a hermit crab story, and you're still trying to tell a story. You're just really condensing it down. And so if these little things that I might pick out aren't working, that might address the story in a larger.
Let me give you an example. Right. A lot of people tend to comment on writing and story when they're responding to my work. They'll reply to those as a duality. Okay. And so what they'll say is very often, wow, the writing is really strong. These images were really evocative. I really enjoyed reading this piece. The story, like they'll get into what is happening, what the characters' motivations are, and they'll express, some opportunities, to punch up the story. Great example. One of the more recent ones in the workshop I did, the prompt had something to do with breathlessness. The idea was a 100-word story that just feels like an explosion of, breath, and like, boom, it's done. Yeah. And so I took that to mean that it's kind of like when you look at a still life portrait on a wall and you sort of take in the picture because it's all happening at once, but you're experiencing it in different part, like your eye is drawn to different things. And so when you look at a painting, you don't take it all in at once. You sort of see the eyes on the characters, and then you go to the darker spots, and you go here, you know, the brightness of this is going to draw your attention. So I thought of my piece that way. And it was this transaction at a garage sale. And so people replied with, wow, the writing's really strong, but like, what's happening? And it wasn't even bad. You know, they weren't saying what's happening is stupid, you should change it. No, they were like, you know, I think you could probably do more in that area. And I agree with them. And stepping back, I said, yeah, gosh, you know, I took the prompt a little too literally there. I think, you know, I was trying to basically make a still life portrait in 100 words, and I accomplished that, but that wasn't really what the reader wants. So anyway, it was a very interesting set of feedback to acquire. And that's what I mean, the difference between the writing and the story.
Yes. I have a couple things that have all collided in my head at the same time. Number one, that piece, and I read that, you sent that to me, and it was very well written. But here's the thing about that. You know, there are going to be people that you're going to meet in workshops in life, people who are writing things that aren't your jam. And I don't mean that in a negative light. It's just stuff that you don't read as much as you may read. Like, I love science fiction. I love Star Trek. You know what I mean? But, you know, I haven't seen the Orville yet, and everybody says that I should watch the Orville. It's just that I saw a little bit of it, and it really wasn't for me. So the thing about that piece is that, yes, the writing was good, and for some folks, including myself, when I gave you my initial thoughts on it, was that this wasn't, you know, there could be more to the story part of it. That doesn't mean that it's not a piece that couldn't get published somewhere. There are spaces. That's the other thing about this. There are some writers that I've met in the past 2 weeks for this SmokeLong workshop that are writing things that are so beyond my league. Like, I am just like, I'm not even playing the same sport as you. You are on another level. They are brilliant. I hate them. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just very like, they're so beautiful. The writing is so incredible that I'm like, I couldn't write this if you gave me 4 different editions of a thesaurus and like 14 days. You know what I mean? Magazines, there are different magazines for everyone. And so if it's something like that is more of a sort of scene, it's just a very tricky line, you know? And I did say to you, well, is there something going on here? Because I know you as a writer. And because of some of the stuff that we're doing here in the SmokeLong workshop, we're trying to tell these sort of like concise stories. But that's not to say that that piece, or a piece that you are writing that is so different and breaks all the boundaries and might not have a conflict and might not have a resolution, won't find a place if that's what you want to write. It's like, I don't want to try and tell somebody something about their piece if what I'm thinking the piece is about is not what they're writing. That can get me a little bit too hamstrung, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Regardless, that story did not have enough conflict. I mean, you always come back to conflict first, which again, I did a refill on a few weeks ago. And it's the kind of thing that, you know, I purposely didn't have a conflict because my goal was to do a still life painting in 100 words. But on reflection, hearing people say, gosh, there's not, you know, enough meat on the bone here is really what people were saying. And I took a step back and I said, yep, that's true. There isn't. So I'm like, all right, well, what could happen that would put the transaction in doubt? Because essentially it's 100 words. It's a guy buying a vase off of a table. So what could complicate that? And then now you've got story. So that's the difference between writing and story. And I find that those tend to kind of go together. So if you out there in the world are looking for ways to critique the work of people who have been kind enough to share their work with you, and if you want to return that kindness by giving them something useful, think about the duality of the quality of their writing versus the kind of story that they're telling. Because I've also seen the reverse, where the writing's not really great, but the characters are interesting and the action's compelling. There's tons of novels that fit this bill, you know, like the hardboiled detective novels from way back, and a lot of like mass market pulp fiction that is really good plot, like really engaging action thriller type stuff. Usually the writing isn't that wonderful.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because people are reading it for the story. So no critique there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those things tend to be kind of connected. So let's move on to our second duality, idea versus execution. So what is it that the author is trying to accomplish? They had a concept or an idea that's really cool and they wanted to run with it. And then did they or did they not pull it off? And that is another duality that I think is really good for us to talk about. So Tim, you've had probably stories that have had this duality, or people who've provided you feedback within this space, idea versus execution.
With this being a sort of workshop where folks are just sharing very, very rough early drafts, I think capturing an idea is the first thing, Again, it's work. Every day you're writing something to post. Every day you're trying to meet that requirement. And there are days when the idea is you're just not feeling it. I've had a couple of those this week. And then once that idea gets there, it's all about the execution. It is about executing it. And if you can execute it in a way that you want your idea to be presented, yeah, you won. This is great. That's fantastic. I think that a lot of times when I'm reading other folks' comments on my work and other works, I think that sometimes the most helpful thing that I can hear is like, oh, I see where you're going with this. And there are folks that do feedback where, and I really, really admire this, where they will give you a little bit of like, this is how I read the story. They're not saying that literally, but like, hey, as I understand it, this person is doing this, this, and this, and the conclusion has this. And those are very, very helpful because as a writer, you're like, oh, at least this message is getting through. At least I'm getting that down. Or if someone is like, I'm getting a little bit caught on this subject because it makes me think that you're actually talking about the mother and not the cinnamon roll. And so
Right.
those are the kind of things where, the feedback is very, very, very helpful. So I think, it's very gratifying when you catch on to an idea that excites you. That won't be every day. Of course it won't be every day. But when I'm sort of sitting down with the prompt of the day and I'm reading through the example pieces that they've presented, catching the idea is huge. And then, of course, trying to execute that's the problem.
Yeah.
I had an idea, actually, it was maybe 2 days ago, maybe a day ago, I'm not sure. Have a really, really great idea. And I was trying to fit it into 100 words. And I decided it was getting late enough in the day. I was like, you know what? I like what this piece is, but I've got to move on to something else. And I think that that's almost as important when to call it for now.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to post a piece that people can critique. And so if you've got the idea, wonderful. If you've executed it, or if you know how you want to execute it, or if you don't feel it's being executed well enough, that's a great time to upload it so that other people, I've done that many times where I'm like, maybe I should post this as it is and see what other people are saying about it and then letting it fly.
Yeah. The idea is kind of prepackaged for us in the workshop context because we're all working from the same prompt. And so we kind of have an idea of what the person is trying to hit. But within that, of course, there's a lot of variability. I had this one writer in one of the groups. I think it's in the current group I have. So I don't think you read this, Tim. But they said, here's my story. I spun the wheel, right? Because they have that kind of random prompt generator within it. And I think the term they got was betrayal. And so they were writing a story in an attitude of betrayal within the constraints of the prompt. And so I read the piece and it was interesting. And so the idea was strong, but the execution was not. And to your point, Tim, no disrespect to the writer, everybody's pumping these things out, same day. Who knows how much time they actually had to sort of, pick at the language or draft multiple versions of this thing. So all the credit in the world to this person for originating something brand new and putting it out in the world same day, kudos. But the execution wasn't there. And so my feedback to them was, hey, thank you for telling me what the idea was that you were shooting for betrayal. I had to read it twice. The second time I understood what the betrayal was. But if I were coming to this cold, not in the workshop and without the context of betrayal, it wouldn't have landed for me. And so that was my feedback. And I also gave them some credit on the quality of their language because their writing was strong. And that was my feedback. So one positive thing, your writing is really good, but the story, I'm not really feeling it. And then the other piece was, hey, thank you for cluing me in on what your idea is, but the execution, not really feeling it. So I think that's a perfectly valid, at least I hope it is, but I think that's a perfectly valid way to provide feedback that is useful. It's actionable. I'm not telling them what to do because that's not my place. And just giving them something to think about,
Yeah. And again, it really comes down to that idea of like trying to be helpful and maybe listening for what they're asking for. Yeah, that's really great. I don't know. I think it's such a really wonderful space. And once I settled into it, I'm glad that I have the year under my belt so that I don't feel as worried about like, I need to have something that is going to knock people's socks off and get me all the awards and the accolades.
Yeah.
I need the piece that's going to make me the captain of all the ships. I just want to have, I'm very happy that I had that last year so that this year I can be more like, you know what? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Now, that is a daily thing. I'm not saying, oh, it's going to happen in waiting a couple days to write a prompt from 4 days previous. But, I know that I feel a lot more confident that I'm going to wake up. I'm still excited when I wake up in the morning and go get my cup of coffee. And I'm like, all right, I know I'm not supposed to look at a screen for the first 30 minutes, but I'm going to drink some water and drink some coffee and see what the prompt is.
That's it. You know it. Yeah, I'm still, I'll be honest with you. I'm still in a position where maybe you were in your first year where I feel like I have to continually one up myself and I've got to prove to people that I belong, that it's worth their time to read. So maybe I'll get to where you are later, but yeah, I'm still very much caught up in that whole, oh my God, it's got to be good. So, the last one before we wrap up is intent versus result. And I think it's very similar to the idea versus the execution, but like, what is the author's intent here? And so if they do happen to share that with you in the feedback process, because that's one of those things that's really kind of neat, is that you have access to the author. So it's not like I read a story that's already been published or one from someone I don't know, and I'm getting it without any context or understanding, and then I'm experiencing it, and then maybe I write something and then move on with my day. I should have a genuine connection with the individual at some level. And so I have to respect that connection when I'm providing feedback. So I think if anyone out there is going into the feedback space thinking of it as extracting a pound of flesh or getting revenge or trying to dominate the person that you're giving the feedback to, save us all the trouble. Don't share it, right? The whole goal, like Tim had said earlier, is to help. And so if you're coming at it with an attitude of help, then sometimes it can be really good to ask the question of the author. Hey, what was your intent with this piece? Because I read it a certain way, but I really want to know what you were going for. And then it becomes kind of a dialogue. And I think that's where we often miss the opportunity to have a discussion about it rather than just, well, I'm reading as the reader in the superior position and I'm, casting my pearls before swine and take it or don't take it. It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to go on with my day. No, I mean, this is a great opportunity to have kind of a back and forth with the author if they want to, like sometimes they don't. But that can be really helpful as well. Oh, well, I was trying for X. Oh, okay, cool. Well, now that I know X, like it makes sense and I like it. You might need to punch up this, and this to help reinforce that it's X, or I was going for X and the reader says, oh, wow, I didn't get that at all. And then you have a discussion about, okay, well, can you show me where that is in the text? Here, here, and here. Oh, wow, I totally missed that. I'm sorry, so, but it's a good dialogue or discussion that not only can help the writer improve their piece in the future, but it can actually help the reader understand how these things are conveyed and then kind of turn the lens back on your own work, see if you can apply it in your own work.
Yeah, that's one of the things, the unintended consequence of doing a workshop. I think that when I first started, I was like, I'm hopefully going to get some pieces that I can get published. I had no idea I was going to meet the community that I did. And so having these dialogues, not only through the workshop posts, the social sort of network of it, But outside of that, meeting people that you can, once the workshop is over, that you can continue to work with. You see them on social media, or there have been a couple of people that I've met whose work I've read outside of the workshop, because there will be people that you get in sync with, and people that are like right on your wavelength. And those are relationships that you're going to have for a very long time. And who knows? Maybe 30 years from now, you'll have a podcast with them like Art and I do.